Should we start? Okay. Well, it's already recording, so let's rock and roll. Danielle, welcome to the
Okay.
podcast.
Thank you.
So the reason I got you on today is because pregnancy is one of the, training around pregnancy and the details that are within that area of expertise is something that's been absent from my remit and my skill set from my early days as a personal trainer. I haven't
Right.
really had too many clients that have been pregnant
Mm-hmm.
over the years. So it's never something that I've really had to learn. But I don't know if you listened to the podcast. Recently, we had a girl called Hayley Madigan on
Yeah.
the early part of the summer during lockdown. And we got into some really interesting stuff and kind of the main purpose of not the main purpose of a female, but one of the main abilities you have and the uniqueness of a female is that you can procreate. And it's something that we got into, and there's loads of things that she was talking about that I just didn't really have any clue about. And I was like, cool, I would love to learn a lot more about this. And I know a lot of my listeners would love to learn a lot more about it. So that's why I wanted to get you on today to get into that. So after talking to you, we spoke loads in the build up to this. And one of the main things that I can kind of gauge from your attitude towards this subject is that you feel that it's something that people are quite uneducated about.
Yes, I would definitely agree. I think there's a lot of women who don't fully understand and appreciate exactly what their body's going through and what the normal expectations are of your body in terms of your general aches and pains and so on, and then looking at, well, what is not normal for pregnancy, what kind of pains are not normal, like musculoskeletal pains and so on. So yeah, and especially when it comes to pelvic floor function and so on, that is probably the biggest area that most women are not educated in.
Yeah.
They don't really know what the pelvic floor is. They don't really know where it is. They don't really know what it does or how to exercise it. So obviously that plays a massive role with pregnancy and childbirth and even later on in life. So yeah, women are massively uneducated.
Literally about 15-20 minutes ago I was on Instagram, as you do, and there was a female athlete that I follow, a CrossFit athlete, and she's not long given birth. And she did this big long post, and I was like, oh, I'm going to read this. This couldn't be more an appropriate timing for me doing this podcast. And she was just saying how from the psychological point of view, as well as the physiological point of view, it's been an absolute whirlwind for her. And it's just been a feeling that she can never have imagined. It's something that I'll never fully understand. And as an athlete and someone who's always been in absolute control of their body, someone who's been at that absolute tier of complete control over themselves, what they do and what they can do with their body, to now have that absolute lack of control. It's just, it's been a really challenging process. So the aim of today's podcast is to help women who are going through this or have gone through it or will go through it in the future, be able to kind of better equipped to deal with pregnancy. So give everyone the 101 on you. What do you do? What do you do for a role? What's your job? How do you help people?
Okay. So I am what is called and considered as a women's health physio. So that means I basically help women, but anything more from an obstetric and gynecological point of view. So any kind of pregnancy related issues. So sometimes it's musculoskeletal pain in pregnancy, or any kind of incontinence in pregnancy, right the way through to looking after them sort of after birth as well. So obviously birth isn't a perfect process. Some ladies, it's very unpredictable. It's probably the one thing that you cannot plan. So obviously some ladies end up with an instrumental delivery or end up with quite significant tears. So I'm responsible for educating them about how to recover from any kind of birth traumas, essentially, right the way through to ladies later on in life. Perhaps they've had their children, they're suffering with any kind of continence issues or prolapses, post-gynae surgeries as well. So obviously, because I work in an acute hospital, I do speak to ladies post-gynae surgery and see ladies after gynae surgeries for recovery. What else do I do? Menopause symptom management. There's a lot of ladies with endometriosis tend to suffer with a lot of chronic pelvic pain, so pelvic pain and pelvic floor overactivity. So being able to look at the relaxation of the pelvic floor. So it's not always a pelvic floor weakness as such. Sometimes there's too much overactivity going on there. So
okay, cool.
So yeah, quite an extensive list of the things that I cover, really.
So as I mentioned before we started this podcast couldn't be any further out of my remit. So I thought the best way to go through today's podcast, so that I don't butcher some of your information that you're going to get across, is walk through the timeline of pregnancy, all the way
Okay.
from conceiving to get it to knowing that you're pregnant, to
Mm-hmm.
giving birth, and then kind of the considerations and thought processes that need to go on in the early stages after giving birth, and then kind of later on, once that is kind of the dust is settled. So, and if there's anything else you want to touch on as we're going through it, by all means, fire it in there and include it. So, what are the main considerations that we need to think about once we are early on in our stages of pregnancy?
In terms of the early stages, I think especially in your first trimester, women can generally expect to get obviously your morning sickness, and people can either not get any at all or get quite a lot. So that can be exhausting itself. First trimester is notorious for extreme fatigue. I know myself, when I was pregnant, I was sleeping around the clock. I wasn't even living in the country at the time. I was living in Turkey. So that's another story. But yeah, so it was extreme heat, first trimester, extreme fatigue. I just remember sleeping around the clock. I've never felt so tired. So obviously you're getting that increase in hormones and so on. So it's a case of, you will generally feel more exhausted.
Yeah.
Generally in the first trimester. So it's a case of, with any kind of phase of your pregnancy, the most important thing is to be listening to your body. So if you feel like you need to rest, you need to rest, and it's not overdoing it as such.
I suppose it's such a massive change to the system that, and it's not something that we've had time to get accustomed to. So you've got the fatigue plus the fact that we are not used to dealing with it, so that kind of makes it double fold and makes it even more challenging. With regards to exercise and training, I know as you get later on into the pregnancy, that's when it becomes more of a consideration. But like you said, if you've got in that, your body is going through some massive changes, if fatigue is piling on, should exercise be something that we're doing in those early stages?
Yeah, if anything, exercise is generally recommended. So it depends on if you already exercise or if you don't, and you're thinking, gosh, I want to make sure I look after myself in pregnancy, because at the end of the day, exercise is beneficial for mom and baby during pregnancy. But it's a case of, like I said, if you already exercise, then you are generally fine to continue doing that. It's generally recommended that runners, they can continue running, but later on they may want to bring the intensity down slightly, because as you get bigger, you get a little bit more uncomfortable. There's only other common sense things, like if you do any kind of contact sport or anything like that, then yes, you want to avoid that. So you've got your obvious things like that as well.
I'm 6 months pregnant and I'm just going to go and do some MMA. No worries.
Yeah. So there are some sort of general basic do's and don'ts. Obviously, ask for help. Like if you go into the gym, ask for help with certain pieces of equipment, or anyone who is more familiar with exercising in pregnancy. You want to avoid any kind of rapid twists or turns, because that can cause musculoskeletal pain and get uncomfortable. And basically just knowing to stop any activity that does cause pain. So exercise is generally good. And there is something known as being fit for birth. So fit for pregnancy and fit for birth, because obviously your body deconditions. It's going through so many physical changes, so many physical alterations. You've got that added ligament laxity during pregnancy, because you've got the introduction of the hormone relaxin. So relaxin, because it is a hormone, it's in your bloodstreams, it's systemic, it's going throughout your whole body. But obviously, where you gain your most weight is in your tummy. So as you gain more weight and you've got more ligament laxity, the main areas that you're going to find some weakness or some aches and pains is from back, pelvis and hip point of view generally. So if there is any exercise that is causing pain, then stop and alter what you're doing.
What are some of the myths that we need to kind of like dispel when it comes to training and pregnancy? Because I remember in my early stages of being a personal trainer, you heard loads of different things like nothing overhead.
Okay.
Nothing that's going to place, nothing that would be like an isometric core exercise, like a plank. But yet then, like I said, this is completely out of my area of expertise, and you hear conflicting evidence now as time goes on. So what are some of the myths that that are not to be true, and that people should kind of like just ignore, and as long as they're comfortable to do so, do so?
Do you know what? I think that's quite a tricky question. So I'm not sure about myths. I would always encourage ladies to exercise within their scope.
Yeah.
So don't overexert themselves. With regards to, like I said, about planking and things like that, it's generally, you need to be a little bit careful, and I probably would avoid positions like that, mainly because obviously you've got your rectus abdominis, which is six back ab muscles that sit on the front, then
Yeah.
your deeper core muscle, which is your transabs. Obviously in pregnancy, your rectus abdominis is stretching and separating, because obviously that's connected by your linear elbow, which is a sheath essentially. So as you'll get bigger and bigger and bigger, that stretch and separates. So transabs has got to work really hard to essentially hold everything in. And you'll probably find that a lot of ladies will notice if you do any kind of activity where you're, let's say, going to lie down in bed or going to sit up, so you're using your core to move, they'll get like almost like a bit of a doming shape and a bit of a coning coming up through. So repeated movements like that will generally start to weaken through that linear album, through that gap, and it'll weaken your core in general. So we want to avoid any excessive use of the core, but engaging transabs in pregnancy is really, really important for general stability.
I suppose as a rule of thumb, if you weren't doing it before pregnancy, you probably shouldn't be doing it during pregnancy.
Yeah, don't do anything. So you won't want to go into any kind of heavy lifting or weights or anything like that. At the end of the day, your body is going through a lot already with that added extra weight. You don't want to be adding more weight onto that.
Yeah.
But the kind of things that are generally good if you weren't exercising before would be things like your brisk walking, your swimming, your antenatal yoga and Pilates, and sort of gym ball, that kind of thing. So nothing too labour intensive if you weren't doing any kind of exercise before. But in terms of the things that you were doing, you find to continue doing so long as it doesn't produce pain. So there's someone I know, she's like pole champion. She's been doing it for 10 plus years or so, and she's been doing it for a very, very long time. She's very fit. And she carried on doing pole, avoiding certain movements that were going to cause her pain and cause over extension of the abdomen and so on. She carried on doing that up until about 37 weeks.
Really?
She's been she's massive on social media. She's been in the newspaper and things like that. So it just goes to show.
A friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine from down south on social media, his wife was giving birth to their second child, and I was watching one of his Instagram stories in the morning, and he was filming her in his gym doing like squat to press and some, not with heavy load, like it was a barbell and a few plates on the side, probably about 30 kilograms within one of their group training sessions. And then like he's pretty on it with social media. Like there's a new post every half an hour to an hour. Like he's all over his Instagram stories. And then there was about an 8-hour gap, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And then he was in the hospital with his newborn baby. So his wife was training the morning that she gave birth.
Oh, wow.
And then he later said along in in the later part of his, that she did that in her first pregnancy as well. So this is where, like, you hear some people say, no, you shouldn't be exercising at the later stage. But then the other, like, she had an incredibly healthy birth from what I could see. So that's one of those. So
100%, and that's
what's some of the things that we can be looking to do to help manage and not future-proof, I know that's the right term, but obviously in the early stages of pregnancy, what can we be doing straight off the bat that's going to help us further along in our pregnancy and when it comes to giving birth?
Well, as we've already been discussing, really, exercise is massively important. Like, I think I started saying in terms of being fit for birth, as what you just said about your friend's partner, wife. Labour and birth itself is quite intensive. So it is quite an exhaustive process, and actually the fitter you are, supposedly the easier it is. It doesn't mean to say that you're going to have a completely uncomplicated birth, because that's not a guarantee, but it does help for birth and recovery afterwards. The recovery afterwards is also massively important to prevent any musculoskeletal pain going forwards into future pregnancies as well.
That was going to be my next question. That's what I have got wrote down here in front of me to read out next. What are some of the musculoskeletal pain that we can get, and how do we manage it? I know it's one of the topics that you were keen to bring up when we discussed this, and it's one of the main things that people generally suffer with in that later stages of pregnancy.
Yeah, well, later stages definitely, but I'm getting people referred as early as 5 weeks pregnant. So as soon as they've peed on that stick, they're already saying that they're in pain. So it's a difficult one. So
so
there's lots of different factors.
To quickly interrupt you, for all the non-physiological fitness physio people out there, define musculoskeletal pain.
So musculoskeletal pain is any kind of pain that is either there all the time or there on certain activity and certain tasks. It can be pain anywhere in your body, whether that be in your joints, your muscles, neuropathic pain, so nerve pain essentially. So basically pain anywhere in your body that doesn't feel like it's coming from internally.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, your joints and your muscles and so on.
To the majority of pain.
yeah, generally the majority of pain.
Cool.
But yeah, in terms of the musculoskeletal pain you can expect in pregnancy, as I was sort of saying earlier, with the release of the hormone relaxin, that generally plays a bit of havoc with your joints. So obviously, when you're pregnant, as you get bigger, you sort of get that change in your posture. So you have more of a lumbar lordosis and more of an anterior pelvic tilt. And then obviously as you get bigger, you're going to get more and more strain on that. So yes, you can expect some general back aches. Sometimes people get sort of mid-foot, sort of thoracic pain, like back pain, lower back pain, pelvic pain. So that can be sort of sacroiliac joints into the bottom, onto the pubic bone itself, into the groin, and even the hips as well. So you can expect some general aches and pains, but I think what people mostly get referred to physio for is when that starts to affect their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And I treat a lot of women with what's called pelvic girdle pain. So most people have heard of SPD, which is symphysis pubis dysfunction, but that only refers to that particular pubic joint at the front. Whereas now it's more the umbrella term of pelvic girdle pain. So that can mean pain anywhere in the pelvic girdle complex. So whether that be the pubic joint at the front or the sacroiliac joints at the back, so where your pelvis connects to the bottom of your spine. So anywhere from the lower back into the pelvis can be affected in pregnancy. And it's usually when it starts affecting day-to-day life. So just being able to get up and move around, walk, do your jobs, looking after the little ones, doing the school run, when it's affecting how you get up and move around, and it can really affect sleep as well. Sleep is one of the biggest complaints.
Do you find that some people just kind of expect this and put up with it?
Some do, and that's okay to a certain extent, is if it's not completely affecting your day-to-day life. I would agree that you, like I say, you do generally expect some aches and pains, but it's when it becomes more severe and you're getting more potentially neuropathic type pain. So you're getting sort of pain going down the legs, or if it's more one-sided, that kind of thing, really. So if it seems to be more, this sharp, something's not quite right, and something's triggering your brain, it's not quite right, then yes, I'd say speak to your midwife and get referred to physio. But I have to say, I think because there is that knowledge that there's women's health physios out there, especially in the NHS, we do tend to get a lot of referrals in, and I'll probably say that's the biggest bulk of my caseload is women with pelvic girdle pain. So I suppose if they have the right advice and management, because a lot of them, because it is the general muscular stuff rather than a joint dysfunction, if you've got the right advice and education, the right day-to-day management, you generally don't need to see a physio.
Fair enough. I think the one thing that I try and talk about with my clients, regardless of this subject, is that the human body is a massive adaptive machine. Like it can adapt to whatever we throw at it. And like you said, getting fit for pregnancy, back to that, I think we forget how well our body can adapt even under extreme stress, like being pregnant. But it is something that females are built for, and especially as we get into those later stages, and like you said with musculoskeletal pain, it's something that we can adapt to, and it's also something that we shouldn't put up with. And from speaking to my clients, and I think people just expect to be in pain, so they put up with it, and they don't even try and manage it. Whereas, like, one of the things I want to talk to you about, is there any way of future-proofing ourselves once we've given birth? And is that something that we should be looking to do in the early stages of post-pregnancy, where, you know, if we're looking to potentially give birth again and, you know, we've let some of these pains go by the wayside and potentially create further problems, you know, what should we be doing when it comes to post-pregnancy and looking to future-proof ourselves for potential future births?
So with regards to, like, for example, with what I was talking about, the pelvic girdle pain, generally 9 times out of 10, as soon as baby's born, problem goes away.
Yeah.
It's only if there's a severe joint dysfunction that pain will reside afterwards. But just because pain goes away after you've had baby doesn't mean that there isn't still a biomechanical issue there.
Yeah.
So I would always generally recommend sort of rehabbing your core, essentially. So yes, we need to look at rehabbing your cardiovascular fitness. That's massively important. But also rehabbing from a core and pelvic floor perspective is going to be massively important. So obviously you've got your diastasis, so your separation of muscles that do need to come back together. They do generally come back together on their own, but if you're going to think about having multiple pregnancies, that's something that really needs to be focused on. So any kind of postnatal Pilates, any kind of core rehab, postnatal yoga, anything like that, swimming, obviously massively good. So with those sorts of things, that's what we need to be doing. And if anything, like I say, the fitter you are, the less likely you are to have musculoskeletal pain in later pregnancies.
Yeah.
I see quite a few ladies who, let's say their first pregnancy was okay, they're on their second or third pregnancies, let's say, and they're starting to develop these symptoms. And I say to them, well, do you do any kind of exercise? Generally the answer is no. Or did you do any kind of exercise after you had your first child to recover, and rehab your postnatal body? No. So the common theme that I'm seeing is that these ladies have not looked after their body after giving birth, or leading up to the next pregnancy, and that's why they're starting to experience these pains.
What about going into it too quickly? And that's something that I experienced for quite a client recently, where I was like, no, like, I haven't given birth, but I know you shouldn't be running like a week after giving birth. Like, please slow down.
Yeah, no,
Is that
100%.
something you come across quite often?
Yes. So generally, when it comes to return to exercise, because I do speak to ladies on the maternity wards after they've given birth, the general advice is, with regards to exercise, if you've had a normal vaginal delivery or any kind of instrumental delivery, you can start to return to exercise 6 weeks postnatal. But that is providing that you have good pelvic floor control. Okay, so you can start off with your low intensity stuff and then build up from there. But if you're starting full pelt, straight back into it, thinking, I can just be as fit as I was before, not going to happen.
Yeah.
So making sure, like I say, we are looking after pelvic floor, because any kind of high intensity, high impact, heavier weights, if you haven't got full control of pelvic floor, you're going to end up with problems with leaking or prolapse, etc. So it's making sure you've got good control of that before you start returning to anything else. If you've had a section, so have you had a cesarean for whatever reason, whether it be elective or emergency, we generally recommend you can start sort of low intensity, sort of more your brisk walking, potentially even some gentle postnatal yoga after 6 weeks, but anything high intensity, high impact, we're saying leave till after 12 weeks. At the end of the day, they've cut through your core muscles.
You can imagine where like the psychological stress starts to pound on then, because you've got people. Let's talk about the people who are fit for birth, and they've even gone through that whole, like, their body's been changing, it's been going in a direction they're not used to, and they're used to being exercising, fit, healthy individuals who remain active all the time. Then you ask them post-pregnancy to not move and not really do anything serious for 3 months, and they've also got all the psychological stress of what they've just gone through. And like, you can imagine, like, I'm not ever going to have to go through this, but I can imagine the first thing that I'd want to do once I've just had 9 months of feeling uncomfortable in my own body, the first thing I want to do is go and take control of that and go and exercise. So you can understand why people are so impatient with it, and why and why it potentially could add to the psychological stress as well.
There's a lot of other things to consider as well. So I can imagine, in terms of, like you say, those women who are very, very physically fit, you know, as soon as they've had baby, they want to return to exercise. And like I say, providing they've had a normal delivery, let's say, you know, allow yourself that 6 weeks recovery, and then you can start going on after that, because in the day your body's
Yeah.
kind of got to recover. Your uterus is still contracting and getting smaller again, so you need that at least initial 6 week period.
Yeah.
So if you've had normal delivery, fine, after that carry on. But it's like I say, it's more of the sections. You've had major abdominal surgery, so it's difficult. But then also, like you say, if you use fitness as a way to feel good, which is important because it does, you've also got the alternative side of it, where you've got a new baby to look after.
Yeah.
So if anything, that's a massive, massive thing. So yes, you'll be thinking about your body, but speaking as a mom, your focus is on that
Yeah.
baby. And I think anyone who is generally quite physically fit, I think they're quite in the know and quite accepting of, actually, I need to listen to my body. So I would assume, and from people I've seen and spoken to and follow on social media and so on, they are understanding of their body needs to recover postnatally, before they can consider going back to exercise. So someone like Gemma Atkinson, so her daughter's like nearly 2 now, I think, and I remember
Yeah.
following her story. She unfortunately ended up in an emergency cesarean, and she's someone who's really quite physically fit. And people like that are more and more starting to show their journey, and actually they're putting it out there saying you shouldn't be returning too soon. And like I say, there is that demand of, you've got a new baby, that's a whole new experience, especially the first time mom. That is emotionally challenging in itself, and your
Yeah.
sleep, etc. And
You've
it's a
kind
big
of
thing to overcome.
yeah, of course, and like you've segued nicely into what I wanted to talk about next, which was like the emotional experience post pregnancy. Now, as a
Mm,
coach, this is probably one of the things that I've had the most contact with.
mm-hmm.
Talking to individuals who have been through this and they're just trying to find their feet again, not
Yeah.
necessarily instantly, not necessarily in the first 12 weeks, but like over the course of a longer period of time, because
Mm-hmm.
you can understand that there's a massive amount of change that has happened
Yeah.
within the body and that needs adapting to.
Mm-hmm.
So what can someone expect post pregnancy? What is like, let's try and normalize it a little bit so that we can understand it and process it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we
So
expect?
in terms of post-pregnancy, so as soon as you've had baby, generally I think it's something around between 2 to 5 days you can expect baby blues to hit, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. You can expect like a surge in hormones, and you can have an emotional few days or so on. For me, myself, I particularly remember that very clearly, because it was, so I had to have elective cesarean because my son was breech. So I went in for that on the Friday. Back then, you had to stay in 2 days. You don't now. You generally stay in one day. So back then, you had to stay in 2 days. So I had him on the Friday. I was due to go home on the Sunday. I'd waited all day for the paediatrician to come to say he can go home. Finally came at like 9:30 in the evening. No, you can't go home. He's jaundiced. Like I was, you know, it's like I was all geared up
Oh,
emotionally to go home. Like I was,
yeah,
you know, it's not nice to stay in hospital. So yeah, so you can expect within the first week or so, your emotions are going to be a bit all over the place. You know, your body's just gone through this process. You've got this newborn baby that you've never had to deal with before, so you can expect that. Then it's overcoming the challenges of, well, I've got to learn how to look after this baby. Then you've got, what I always say to moms, particularly first time moms, is that don't allow people to be too overbearing. So when it comes to having a new baby, everyone wants to see the baby. They're not bothered about you. They just want to come see the baby. But that can be quite exhausting in itself. So you're
yeah,
recovering from labour and birth. You're recovering from sleep, this new sleepless night pattern that you've got. It's exhausting anyway. And then having visitors all the time can be exhausting. So I always say to moms, you know, say to people you can come within an hour or two on this particular day. Don't always have constantly, you know, people coming and going, because at the end of the day, you've got to bond with that baby. I myself struggled with bonding a little bit. So I had an elective section, so no labour, no birth. 1 minute I was pregnant, next minute baby was here. And even though I breastfed, which is meant to help with bonding, I struggled to get over the concept of this is my baby,
Yeah.
because I didn't feel like I'd done anything to have that baby, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
hadn't gone through the labour, I hadn't done anything to get this baby to arrive, if that makes sense. So for me, I really struggled to have that attachment, like this is mine. So in terms of things like that, that can be quite difficult. If any ladies have had, depending on your birth experience, that is massively influential and can impact your mental health post-pregnancy. So a lot of ladies, if they've had an instrumental delivery or had what's called either third or fourth degree tear, there is services for ladies to go to for recovering from birth trauma. So these sort of like birth trauma clinics where they go and see a specialist midwife who debriefs them on these sorts of
Yeah.
things, just to go through exactly what happened.
I was talking to a friend about coming onto this podcast and just kind of get a bit of a scope of what she thought, some of the questions that I should ask and some of the details that we should go into. And this was one of the main subjects that she said, like, I think this is something that needs to be spoke about and destigmatized and normalized. And she said to me, she was like, one of the main, you know, it took me years to accept that I had very severe postnatal depression, and that like my mental health suffered post pregnancy. And it's, you know, I could be very wrong in saying this, but from a male perspective, that's one of the main observations that I see, and that, you know, I definitely have empathy towards, is that individuals having like this mini or major kind of crisis of self where their whole world has just been shifted, and they've gone through this, like, okay, I'm pregnant, this is 9 months long, I'm now post pregnancy, I have this child. And then it's like that finding their feet again process. And even not necessarily like about the relationship with the child or anything like that. It's like, okay, at what point now do I start this self-love process again? And like, and my expectations of myself and how I perceive myself. And that's just one of the main things that I see and that I have massive empathy towards. And you know, and with clients that I've had, I'm trying to talk them through that process. But obviously, as a male, there's only a certain amount of kind of rapport you can build up with that. And like, you know, is there anything from your perspective that can help with that process and to find our feet again?
It is. Do you know what? That it is really difficult, because again, speaking from my own like personal experience as a mom and as a single mom to mention as well, it is very difficult to really know what that looks like, because as you say, like this new baby, this child or children just take up all of your time, all of your life. And I do see a lot of women who are like, their children are their world and everything is about them, which I think is great if that works for you. Me personally, I've always said I'm not a playground mom. I'm not a playground mom. I'm not someone who, you know, has the time to drop their child off in the morning and pick them up after school and be there stood chatting and going for coffee mornings, things like that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. You've got that great social network and that support. I think it's brilliant. For me personally, I'm a different kind of character. So I'm more like these women who I need a bit more. I'm a person as well. You know, I'm not just a mom to this child. Yes, I am when I'm with them, but I'm a person as well. I have needs. So for me, so I was a dancer before I had my son. That was my profession prior to physio. And they kind of both stopped at the same time. So I'd lost dance, and then I got this new baby. So I went through a similar kind of crisis, like, who am I? What do I want to do? What am I really passionate about? So for me, it was more not so much an exercise fitness kind of thing, even though, yes, I did miss dance and I wanted to get back into it. It was more, well, what am I going to do for work now? What am I going to do for a job? Because that was my job. So I was like, what else am I passionate about? So it is difficult.
You can just imagine though, can't you? Like your whole world has been completely shifted and changed. Or, you know, I know it's for 9 month pregnancy, but to a degree overnight, when
Mm, yeah.
you go to the hospital one day and then you come back
Mm,
from the hospital with a +1.
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then from an individual point of view, regardless of the hormonal changes, regardless of the physical changes,
Mm,
but from the impact of the people around you and the environment around you, and how that focus is now shifted away from you,
yeah.
and you kind of have to, for the first time ever in your life, your sole existence is purely based on making sure
Mm,
this newborn
yeah.
child,
Survives.
survive, yeah, and like survives and thrives. and
Yeah.
and you can imagine, like, for me now, the stage of my life that I'm in at the moment, I'm trying to start a business, and I've just got so much, like, even as a male, and having to go
Mm,
through that process would be astronomical. So I can't even bear,
terrifying.
yeah, and like, so I can't even bear to think as a female what it must be like to add on
Mm,
all the physical and emotional stress that you've currently
yeah.
been through. And
Yeah.
it's that I just feel that one of the things that I observe is that we stop being kind to ourselves to a certain
100%.
degree. And I just
I
feel that
agree.
that's something that, like, actually,
Hmm.
I know you've just given birth, and I know that
Hmm.
everybody around you is now focused on this child,
Yeah.
and I bet some people are even scrutinizing your relationship and your ability at motherhood early on. But who cares? You kind of just need
Yeah.
to be a little bit kind to yourself.
Yeah. 100%. You know what? I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because when you're when you're a new mom, obviously, so things like social media have massive influences. If you
Yeah.
haven't got the right kind of things on social media, that can bring your mood right down. If you are having troubles with your baby and you see someone posting perfect pictures and perfect videos of how they are with their child, that can bring you down as well. So like you say, is being kind to yourself and saying, "Do you know what, I'm going to do what works for me." So the things like your midwives and your oh, what are they called now? Oh my gosh, health visitors. I was about to try and think house support workers. No, health visitors and midwives. They're there to guide you and advise you. Um, and yeah, we should be trying to follow that advice as much as possible. But the thing that I always say to my patients is things like, you do what's best for you. So with regards to put your baby to bed and things like that, yes, they should sleep in the cot and so on. But if you're exhausted and they're getting up in the middle of the night for feeds several times, if they need to go in your bed so you can get some rest, then you need to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it is kind of not ignoring everything totally, but taking it with a pinch of salt and actually doing what's right for you. Like my son would feed in the middle of the night, and I'd be there feeding him, and I would fall asleep. I'm not a perfect
I
parent. Eventually,
suppose
I'd be like,
I
put him
suppose that
down.
there is no definitive blueprint for those early
No,
stages of motherhood,
no,
but
no, not
we
at all.
kind of, even from a male and a female perspective, we kind of expect there to be like, this is what these are the
Mm,
do's and don'ts, and you do the do's and you don't do the don'ts.
yeah.
Whereas actually, if there's a couple of hacks in there, like you just said, that you can do to
Mm,
make things a hell of a lot easier, then
mm,
we probably should be doing them to make our life a little bit easier.
yeah. Look,
It's
rest is so important as well. When it comes to things like
yeah.
that, rest is so important. So if whatever it is that you're doing, if it means you get more rest, then you need to do it.
One of my clients at the moment, Michelle, she, like I've mentioned it before, she's recently given birth, and I think, like, her son Taylor, he's been okay. Like, he came in and he was like, yeah, we've
Mm,
been getting like a 4 night sleep. He's been having like 8-9 hours, like, it's happy days. And the next week she came in, she's like, oh, I definitely just cursed myself. Like, we had the worst week in terms of sleep, and I was like, oh, you spoke too soon.
yeah, spoke
I
too
think
soon, definitely.
like what springs to mind is whenever you're on an aeroplane, and if anything ever goes wrong, the oxygen masks drop down, don't they?
Yeah, yeah,
There's a point to this, but you
yeah. I can see where you're going.
put your own oxygen mask on first, and that's
Hmm.
how I kind of perceive these early stages of
Yeah,
motherhood. You are
100%.
not going to do your role very well
Hmm.
unless you start to prioritize yourself. And from a personal trainer point of view,
Definitely.
someone who has kind of like a lot of contact of individuals at all walks of life, and I get to see the little nitty gritty details that some other people's
Mm,
don't. That's one of the main things that I observe, and I feel like we should just be
yeah,
a bit nicer to ourselves.
a
And
hundred percent.
and one of the main things you were talking about earlier on in this podcast is about getting fit for birth, and I think
Hmm.
my whole, let's call it mission, and my whole why behind me being a personal trainer and the business and collective fitness is that there is a lot more reasons to exercise than the aesthetic
Definitely.
reasons
Yeah.
that social media and marketing materials often portray
Hmm.
to us. There is a
Yeah.
bazillion and one reasons why we should exercise. It is not about how we look. about our mental health, about our performance, about our ability to do our job and our
Definitely.
day a little bit better. And I think one of the main things that you spoke about today is actually exercise can massively impact our ability to procreate successfully and especially look after ourselves as well post-pregnancy.
Definitely. That's it. Even that's, I think it wouldn't be so emphasised by the NHS and so on if it wasn't so important. You know, you've got your daily, your weekly recommendations for exercise for different ages and so on. You know, we know it is important and we know it's the right thing. You know, with physiotherapy, what is, you know, the biggest evidence base for treating different conditions is exercise. So we know that it definitely is important, and especially when it comes to as we said, talking about recovering postnatally and going forward into future pregnancies, but also later on. So as sort of another part of my role is treating women later in life when they go through menopause as well. That is another significant event in a woman's life that affects them physically and mentally.
I literally think you are beginning to read my mind, because that is, again, for about the fifth time this podcast, that was literally the next thing that I was looking for an opportunity to segue into.
Yeah.
So, like, do you want to touch on menopause a little bit? Like, talk a bit about it. I feel like my girlfriend just doesn't stop talking about it with her mother. Like, it's a common theme conversation and like stuff that they joke about. But obviously, it is a real thing. And when I did that podcast with Hayley Madigan at the start of the summer, I got a couple of direct messages saying, this is really cool, I really enjoyed this podcast. Is there a way you could do one that talks a little bit more about menopause and the kind of the considerations around that? So yeah, hit me.
Oh gosh, honestly, you could probably do a whole podcast on menopause. There's so much information there's so many things that your body goes through, so many changes that your body goes through. Essentially, you've got your perimenopause, then you've got your menopause when your period stops, and then postmenopause is when your periods have stopped for a whole year. So the perimenopause stage can go on for quite a long time, where you get kind of like your regular periods, but essentially what's happening is obviously you're getting that reduction and eventually stop in hormones. There's so many different symptoms that come along with that, and it's absolutely massive, and it can affect people in so many different ways, and it can really affect how they function day to day. And I know there's a massive push, generally I think it's been on the news semi recently, with people from the organisation Positive Pause. So again, it's a menopause organisation. And they've been on the news recently about trying to encourage employers to be more educated about what is menopause and how does it affect women, and how can they be more accommodating to women at work who are going through it. There's ridiculous list of symptoms that you can be getting with it. So obviously your most common one is your hot flushes or hot flashes. There's anxiety, depression, mood swings, loss of sex drive, fatigue, osteoporosis, because obviously you're not getting your hormones, and that can weaken the bones. Weight gain, sleeplessness, brain fog, incontinence as well. So part of my role when it comes to menopause is that, for example, if a lady's had a couple of children, they were told to do the powerful exercises, so they said they did it initially postnatally, but they've never really carried on with it. Later on down the line, when it comes to menopause, obviously you're getting that reduction in hormones. So what happens is you get the reduction and loss of tissue elasticity and tissue healthiness, essentially, down below. That can cause symptoms of painful intercourse, continence issues, prolapse issues. So even if you've never had these problems before, these can arise through menopause as well.
And I can probably guess what the answer to this is going to be, but what are some of the things we can do to help manage it and make that transition an easier and more comfortable one?
So a lot of the symptoms that you can get in menopause, lo and behold, you'd be surprised, exercise. So especially when it comes to weight gain, and the osteoporosis, depression, anxiety, and those kind of things. Again, exercise will help with that, mainly because obviously, like I say, you're getting that reduction in hormones. So you're getting, with estrogen blocks the breakdown of serotonin. That's its job, and obviously if you're getting the reduction of that, then serotonin is going to be broken down a lot quicker. So we need to supplement that. So we know that exercise, releases happy
Interesting.
hormones
That's
and
something
so
I
on.
never knew.
Yeah, so it's exercise again, bringing that in to get that good release of happy hormones to avoid any kind of mood swings, depression, anxiety, and helping you get that feel good factor.
Yeah.
That's really important. Obviously, exercise will help with your sleep and so on. With regards to anything gynae related, then pelvic floor exercises are going to be massively important. So really getting educated about that. Get educated on how to do pelvic floor exercises correctly. Okay, so that's a massive thing, because sometimes women think they're doing it properly, but actually they're not. Sometimes they're pushing out instead of drawing up inside. So that's one thing. Also, I think there's still some GPs and some healthcare professionals that are still saying stop mid-flow. Please don't do that. Okay, so I know what pelvic floor exercise. It's when you're holding the wee, like you stop yourself from going for a wee, and like no, please don't stop mid-flow. We know that that's not the right thing to do.
I can safely say a GP's never said that to me.
Honestly, you'd be surprised. I still get ladies say, "Oh yeah, GP told me to just stop mid-flow as I'm having a wee." I'm like, no, please don't do that. We know it can cause infections.
I think a general theme of today's podcast is that a lot of people are less educated around the subject than they think. I feel a little bit more educated about it now, and I think you've been an absolute wealth of knowledge today. Is there any other subjects that you want to cover before we start to round up?
Not that I can think of, but I think the main thing for me, and the one thing that I'm massively passionate about, is, like you say, educating women. So get educated about your bodies, because there's been a massive emphasis on what we've been talking about in terms of getting fit, getting healthy, exercising. There's so many benefits to that. And I always say this to my patients: everybody thinks about getting fit and active, going to the gym, doing these exercises and that. But the one group of muscles that's massively important that gets forgotten about is your pelvic floor.
Yeah.
But essentially, the role of pelvic floor muscles is to give support to the pelvic organs. But essentially, if you imagine you've got your pelvis, you've got a whole open area because your pelvis doesn't come underneath you.
Yeah.
The whole of the pelvic rim is full of pelvic floor, is your pelvic floor muscles, 3 layers deep into the pelvis. So it's essentially got all of your weight on top of it. So weight gain is going to be an issue, and things like that. So there's a lot of considerations that just basically go and get yourself educated in regards to pelvic floor and the right way to do pelvic floor exercises. And I think we were talking about, any myths and things like that, dispelling any kind of myths. Leaking and any kind of incontinence or pain after having a child is not normal. Okay, so just because you've had a child doesn't mean that you should be incontinent, doesn't mean that it's okay to be incontinent. I hear it all the time, patients saying to me, "Oh," because I say, "Have you got any bladder weakness?" And there's like, only sort of the normal post-pregnancy stuff. I'm like, no, it's not okay to leak. I've had 2 or 3 kids. I'm like, that doesn't mean it's okay.
I train at a CrossFit gym sometimes, and obviously with CrossFit there's loads of skipping and box jumps and jumping, and it's like a bit of a common conversation amongst the ladies before any time of work. It's something they expect. They'll run off to the toilet to go and sort themselves out, ready to do the skipping, and I understand. Like, I almost wee myself when I skip, but it's like when we discussed this pre podcast, I was like, oh, okay. Like, I just thought that was something to be expected.
No, absolutely not. It's not a normal symptom post-pregnancy or post-childbirth. It's not a normal symptom, because at the end of the day, the pelvic floor muscles are muscles like any other in your body. We can work them and get stronger. So it doesn't mean that just because you've had a baby that you're prone to be leaking. Yes, you may be at increased risk, but if we exercise in the right way, then there's no reason why you should be. And if anything, the nice guidance for the management of continence and prolapses and so on is not just medication or not just going for surgery. The first point of call is refer to physio and have a supervised pelvic floor program.
Danielle, you've been an absolute wealth of knowledge today.
I can talk for hours.
I can imagine for a subject that I was incredibly uncomfortable coming into this podcast to talk about. I've actually really enjoyed this, and you've made it
Fab.
highly informative, highly educated, highly educative. Is that a word? That's probably not a word, but you know what I mean.
It's fine. We can make it at work.
And I really enjoyed this. Where can people find you?
So I am on social media. I'm on both Instagram and Facebook. My business page is Mindful Mama Physio. And I've also just launched my website, which is mindfulmamaphysio.co.uk as well. So you can find me on there. So I'm starting private clinics. So again, offering women's health physio, and I will be doing acupuncture clinics as well. So again, one thing I didn't mention was the use of acupuncture is really, really beneficial for musculoskeletal pain and other symptoms, like with menopause and so on. So not just women, but anyone. So yeah, you can pretty much find me on anywhere.
Cool.
Yeah, I was really surprised by your knowledge and your grasp and understanding. So I'm really impressed.
I'm not just a pretty face. I think obviously we spoke a little bit before the podcast, but within the Collective Fitness app, I definitely want you to get you involved and get you to do a whole trial of education-based videos around pregnancy and about training and exercise and linking that all together. And I think if there's one thing to know from today's podcast is that, well, first thing is weeing yourself is not normal, but the second thing is we have provided people with reason 4,222,000 of why they should go and participate in exercise. And I think that's probably a good place to finish it. Danielle, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for listening, and have an amazing